We finally have some concrete movement on the issue of a Trump disqualification from appearing on ballots. A long-shot presidential candidate named John Anthony Castro has filed a lawsuit to have Trump rendered ineligible for the 2024 ballot in New Hampshire, given his incitement of the insurrection on January 6. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution would prohibit anyone who engaged in insurrection or aided others who engaged in insurrection from holding state or federal office. According to Castro's court filing, Trump should be judicially declared ineligible to appear on the 2024 Republican primary ballot for having provided aid or comfort to the insurrectionists that violently attacked our U.S. Capitol on January 6th. This results in disqualification from pursuing and or holding any local, state, or federal public office in the U.S. pursuant to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Now, Castro, who is 39 years old and who won't appear on the primary ballot in all 50 states, has announced that he will file self-funded lawsuits in several more states by the end of the week. He came out and said, quote, "My primary goal is to deny Trump a second term." Interestingly, Castro also filed a lawsuit in Florida seeking to have Trump disqualified. A judge had dismissed that lawsuit for lack of standing, for which Castro has appealed to the 11th Circuit and asked the Supreme Court to rule that he does have standing to sue. Of course, the argument can absolutely be made that Castro does have grounds to sue, and in fact, that argument was made not by some flaming liberal, but rather Stephen Calabrese, co-founder of the not even close to progressive Federalist Society, who suggested that another one of Trump's primary opponents, Chris Christie, was, quote, legally injured by Donald Trump's name being on the ballot because they draw from some similar voters. Christie should sue if necessary to get Trump's name off the ballot. And of course, it goes without saying that if Christie has grounds to sue as a Republican primary candidate, then so does Castro, who is in the exact same position. New Hampshire's Secretary of State David Scanlon, a Republican, spoke to NBC about the impending litigation, saying he's, quote, not seeking to remove any names from the presidential primary ballot, but he's trying to figure out what to do about potential challenges that are brewing. And he wasn't the only Secretary of State to speak out. Arizona's Secretary of State Adrian Fontes also spoke about the fact that his office is now figuring out how to handle potential complaints or legal challenges over whether Trump should be allowed to be on the ballot. He said, quote, "We have to have final certification of eligible candidates for the primary ballot by December 14th for Arizona's presidential preference election. And because this will ultimately end up in court, we are taking this very seriously. We need to run an election. We need to know who is eligible, and this is of incredible national interest. We aren't taking a position one way or the other. If there are people who want to fight this out, they need to start swinging because I have an election to run." There was also Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, who came out and said this.
Secretary Benson, I know this conversation is in its earliest stages with sort of the legal framework being put out there just this week by Judge Ludig and by Professor Tribe. But what questions would you have if this is indeed what the Constitution would require folks like Mr. Raffensperger and yourself to do?
Well, thanks, Nicole. I think that's the right way to frame it right now. And first and foremost, I want to be clear. I'm going to follow the law. What the law says is what is going to dictate how I hope all of my colleagues proceed in this moment, in particular around thorny issues like this one. Now, in following the law, that means being very careful, making decisions not from a political standpoint, but from a legal standpoint, and asking questions like about due process. Now, typically, a conviction is used to determine the facts and solidify the facts when someone is deemed ineligible, when there are perhaps thorny issues at play. If we're not going to predicate this on a conviction under the law, then what and how do we ensure due process? How do we define insurrection or rebellion? Who makes that determination? And what potential guardrails do we need to have in place so that this is not this precedent that could be created if this legal interpretation is adopted? How can we avoid that being weaponized in the future in this era of false equivalency by officials who want to block candidates from the ballot simply because they disagree with them politically? So this is a thorny, challenging issue. But and I should emphasize that particularly those of the secretaries in battleground states, I'm going to be talking with Al Schmidt in Pennsylvania, with Cisco Aguilar in Nevada, with Brad Raffensperger, because we know in particular in our states the impact that this decision could have, not just among our voters, but in the nation. And so we're taking this seriously. We're looking at it carefully, and we're weighing all of the thorny issues at play.
All of which is to say, a lot of information has to be gathered by these secretaries of state, but they are in the process of listening, and their opinions are being formed by a raft of constitutional scholars like these.
2024 presidential candidate Asa Hutchinson, who will join me in a bit, he says that Donald Trump might be disqualified from holding office based on the 14th Amendment, which says that U.S. officials who engage in insurrection or rebellion or aid and comfort them cannot hold office again. You were not only an impeachment manager in the January 6th impeachment of Donald Trump, you were a constitutional scholar. So do you agree with Asa Hutchinson on this?
Well, absolutely, and we've been saying all along that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment presents a clear and unequivocal statement that anyone who has sworn an oath of office, and by the way, not just a president, but members of Congress and others who hold federal office, who engage in insurrection or rebellion, having sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic, can never serve again in federal or state office. And this was added after the Civil War as a general constitutional principle, and we have to abide by it. Donald Trump was impeached by the House of Representatives for inciting an insurrection against the Union, and then 57 of 100 senators determined as a constitutional fact that Donald Trump had incited an insurrection. So I think you've got robust bicameral, bipartisan majorities that have already established this as a fact. And I agree with the conservative Federalist Society law professors who are out there saying, as well as Mr. Hutchinson, that Donald Trump is disqualified just as if he were running and not a born U.S. citizen, or if he were running and he were 24 years old.
But what I want to point out is I'm not even sure he's qualified to be the next president of the United States. And so you can't be asking us to support somebody that's not perhaps even qualified under our Constitution. And I'm referring to the 14th Amendment that a number of legal scholars said that he is disqualified because of his actions on January 6th.
So what would you have officials in your state, any other state, do based on the 14th Amendment? Would you have them just leave Trump off the ballot, off the primary ballot, off the general election ballot?
No, there should be a court declaration, and so there would have to be a separate lawsuit that would be filed in which there would be a finding that the former president engaged in insurrection, and that would disqualify him. That's one avenue. The other way would be that if a specific state made that determination on their own, then that would put the burden on someone else challenging that. Either way, it winds up in court for a specific finding. But I expect those lawsuits to be filed. I expect some states to take that action. But I think it's a serious jeopardy for Donald Trump under our Constitution not being qualified.
So the question becomes now, how will this happen? What's almost certain here is that a Secretary of State, likely in a blue state, will determine that based on the standards set forth in the Constitution, including the 14th Amendment, Trump isn't eligible to run. And they'll make the decision not to include his name on the ballot, which will invariably be challenged in court. At the same time, a Secretary of State in a red state will make the determination that they don't care what the Constitution says, that they want Trump's name on the ballot regardless of the fact that he's no longer eligible based on the 14th Amendment. And they'll include his name on the ballot, and that too will be challenged in court. Those lawsuits will ultimately hop from state court to federal court, given the fact that electing the President of the United States is a federal issue, and it's all but certain that it'll make its way up to the Supreme Court, which will ultimately have the final say. So this is, of course, just the beginning of what promises to be a long process. But I want to remind you of one thing. If the Secretary of State does decide that Trump's name should not appear on the ballot, that is not their decision, it was Trump's. It was him who decided to summon an angry mob to the ellipse on January 6th. It was him who told them to go to the Capitol. It was him who did so knowing they were armed. It was him who told them to pressure Mike Pence into doing something blatantly illegal. And those insurrectionists themselves conceded, both in court and in public, that they were acting on his orders. The Secretary of State's job is to follow the Constitution. And if Trump's name is left off the ballot, that'll be because they did their job. So if Trump is looking for someone to blame in all of this, he might want to start with himself. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to the channel and do your part to help grow the progressive media ecosystem. I don't do sponsorships or paid ads, I won't ask for money, but just subscribing to this channel goes a really long way, and it helps get the message out to more people. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. You can also subscribe to my Spanish language channel, which I made to reach those crucial Spanish-speaking voters. That link is on the screen too. And finally, if you want to listen to my audio podcast, you can follow that link as well. Thanks so much for watching.